Welcome to AnoTalk, the official podcast of the Aluminum Anodizers Council. Dive into the fascinating world of aluminum anodizing, the technology that makes aluminum look like aluminum and keeps it in top shape. Join your hosts as they bring you expert insights and lively discussions with guest speakers on everything from process best practices and regulatory issues to environmental impacts and innovative applications. Whether you're an industry professional, a curious newcomer looking to add color to your aluminum projects, or just someone who thinks running electricity through metal and acid sounds fun, this is the podcast for you. Stay tuned and stay informed.
Hey, we are rolling. That's always good. New technology. For those of you that are following us in chronological order, at the end of the last podcast, we talked about all this new technology and look, if you're looking at us on YouTube, we have our names at the bottom. So, but we still should introduce ourselves. So, Dr. O.
Hi there. As you can see, if you're watching, we're on YouTube. I didn't realize we're on YouTube.
We're everywhere.
Oh my gosh, we're like Big Brother at this point. But as you can see on YouTube, from my little screen thing here, my name is George O. I'm a research and development chemist at Quaker Houghton, developing new products. And Quaker Houghton supplies all sorts of chemicals for the metals industries, and we work in anodizing. I've also got my beautiful co-host Tej Patel.
Ooh, thank you for the endearing words, George. So everyone, my name is Tej Patel. I'm with a company called Techivon. We supply anodizing chemistry and colorants globally. I'm a director here out of our Chicago office. And then due north of me is my lovely co-host, Mark Spencer.
Well, thank you. Thank you, George. Thank you, Tej. My name is Mark Spencer. I'm our sales manager here at Akron Anodizing, broadcasting from Plymouth, Minnesota. And I'd like to say we're the benefactors of the lovely chemicals from Houghton and Techivon. And not to say one order is better than the other, Techivon and Houghton. Right down the middle.
Totally impartial.
100%.
Excited about today's guest. It's been too long. I don't know where he's been. He's probably been in some cabin in Connecticut on a boat, or maybe on. Anyway, so we're excited to bring back Charlie Simmons. Hello, Charlie.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to be here. I'm broadcasting not from Washington, but from a small cabin in Connecticut, where I'm getting ready for the Thanksgiving recess. Anyway,
nice.
Happy to be here and happy to be invited to participate in the AnoTalk podcast again.
For our viewing and listening guest, Charlie writes a regulatory report that comes out, 3-4 times a year, Charlie?
Actually, it's twice a year. Once at the end of the year, beginning of the year, and once in midterm in July.
Oh, okay.
Good to know, because it takes me that long to read it. Then I read it again. I think, Charlie's issued a new one. So, anyway, thank you for that. Today, we are going to chat about several things. The first one is the Republican trifecta. Then we'll talk about cabinet picks and how they could impact our industry. And then finally, in Charlie's last regulatory report, he has some really good information regarding the OSHA updates. If you're a member of the Aluminum Anodizers Council, and this is a key, you get this report. If you're not, you should join, because there are some key takeaways that could have a huge impact on our business. So, Charlie, it's been 2 years since you've been on. Why don't you reintroduce yourself to all our listeners? My mom would appreciate that. And then we'll go from there.
Happy to do so, Mark. I am an attorney in Washington, D.C., and my specialty is in environmental law and regulatory issues. And I've worked with the AAC in one capacity or another for really well over 20 years now. I enjoy being able to serve as the legal investigative reporter for the AAC to try and ferret out those issues which can affect the anodizing community, as well as other intellectual property issues of developing technologies that people might be interested in. But right now, we're in the midst of a huge transition in regulation. And this is certainly going to affect everything that we've done, not just in the anodizing operations, but in the entire supply chain, as well as in international commerce affecting anodized materials. So let's take on, at the very beginning, what happened? Something people are still asking themselves, what just happened in Washington and across the country? What we had is an electoral sweep where the American electorate re-elected President Trump to a second term, Vice President Vance, and as well as a dominant Republican Senate. And as just was recently announced, that the House is also going over to the Republicans too. So this is what we would call a trifecta in government, where the Republicans are going to be in control of policy. They're going to set their agendas. They'll have 4 years to screw it up. Let's hope they don't. But the ball is in their court. The question's been asked, what can we expect going forward? Right now, we're in a transition time where the Republican camp is aligning the nominees for various cabinet posts. You can expect the executive orders that Donald J. Trump will be issuing on his first day in office in January are already being drafted. And you can also expect between now and when the curtain falls on the Democrats in Congress, they still have power. They've got subpoena power. They're head committee. And you can bet that there will be opposition, particularly to some of the cabinet positions that have been announced. So, what we can think of as what the expectations might be. I think that the first order of business is going to be executive orders coming from the chief executive, President Trump, that are going to basically undo all of the executive orders that undid the last Trump 1 executive order. And executive orders are great because they're a quick and dirty way of getting things done, but they're not durable. What's going to really count, though, is the regulatory agenda and the policy positions going forward. And this is pretty much revealed by the cabinet picks. And we'll get to there in a moment. But for the several different categories of what can be expected from a new Trump administration, I think that we're going to have, number one, a regulatory pause. There's going to be a time out for regulation. The regulations that have been promulgated, not published in the Federal Register yet, they'll be hit the pause button on that. There are some regulations that might be ripe for the Congressional Review Act review and repeal. The target might well be aquatic life reporting for standards for PFAS, PFAS forever chemicals, which have been targeted by our EPA. The new source review for project emissions, as far as air emissions go. Hit the pause button on that. Certain international efforts, like the Global Plastic Pollution Treaty, might hit the pause. And there are other regulations which have been published and not published, which are going to be stayed pending litigation outcomes. This is another pause on regulation. The two that come to mind is going to be the OSHA heat injury and illness prevention rule the SEC corporate climate disclosure rule, which has already been paused pending the outcome of litigation. However, one really has to ask, do you think a Trump Justice Department is going to continue litigating to defend a regulation they don't like? I think that'll die. EPA's methane rule, that's going to be paused through litigation. We're going to have a huge rollback of all the Biden administration priority initiatives. This is going to be important, perhaps from a legislative standpoint, because a lot of the spending that we have seen allocated under the bipartisan infrastructure law, as well as the Inflation Reduction Act, hasn't been spent yet. Now, it's going to take perhaps a legislative initiative in order to change how those dollars are spent. But segueing into another topic, which we'll get to in a moment, is the Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy Government Efficiency Office. So, a lot of things in play. The federal litigation engine, though, under a new Trump Justice Department, I expect to be paused. They're not going to proceed on a lot of rules that have been vigorously defended by the Biden administration. That will not happen. What's really going to be important is energy. We're going to see some sea changes in how energy policy is administered in the country. The first off, we saw on the first day in office, the first days of the Biden administration, was a pause of oil and gas leases on federal land. We saw that Biden rejoined the Paris Agreement. We had a Biden ban on liquefied natural gas exports. And we had a lot more spending on carbon capture and renewable energy projects. So the question becomes, what is Trump going to keep and what is the Trump administration going to toss? I think there's a huge emphasis on fossil fuels, the whether the infrastructure money that's been allocated or targeted towards the electric vehicle development, as well as nationwide charging stations, is that going to continue? We have, of course, Elon Musk in the picture now, but Tesla has its own fairly well-developed charging system in place, and they're proceeding on that. So what's going to happen with infrastructure? I see more emphasis on highways, and maybe a de-emphasis on the EVs. I think that as far as high-speed rail, possible. Again, Musk enters the picture because he's a huge technology proponent, and he had come up with his own, I've forgotten the name of it. It was a hyperlink.
Hyperloop, yeah. Thank you. On that kind of, Charlie, it's an interesting kind of intersection point, right? With Elon Musk and obviously deregulation, the Trump administration. How do you see that whole thing playing out? Because obviously he's a big proponent of EVs and kind of moving away from fossil fuels. So do you think do you think maybe compared to his previous administration this time, because Elon's involved, there may be more appetite to engage on the EV side than there was last time?
That's entirely possible, but I think that Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy are going to have a challenge in the manner in which the DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, is set up and what its role is in the government. Because I think the concept right now is the Elon Musk team and his team of geniuses is going to use artificial intelligence and lean business thinking to cut at least $2 trillion worth of federal budget going forward. That's about 30% of federal spending, and I think that's their target that I've heard. So we're going to be using AI and crowdsourcing to identify waste, fraud, and abuse and start cutting that stuff out. But problem is, this is going to be a non-government entity. Bulk is not going to be a member of the U.S. government, nor is Vivex. Now, then we enter up in an interesting situation where if Trump starts adopting the Dodge policies of cutting spending, then the question becomes, is this another example of the chief executive practicing legislative power or flexing legislative authority, which then is raising a constitutional issue as to which branch of government is he and what authority does he have? So we could have a more difficult time in administering the Department of Government efficiency than people are hoping for.
So, Charlie, on that note, kind of the balance of actually, performing the efficiency versus the impact of a pause on regulation. In terms of the impact to the anodizing industry, do you think those two are going to offset as a headwind and a tailwind, and the net will be kind of consistent, or do you think it may be a lag before we start seeing any sort of increase in activity on the anodizing side until maybe the Q2 of his administration?
I would say the latter. I think that government moves with glacial slowness.
Sure.
There's going to be some quick action, and Trump is going to want to hit the ground running and undo a lot of some of the silliness that we saw, the pause on liquefied natural gas exports. That hurt people like the Ukrainians and Europeans who've been suffering under a lack of energy coming where they were used to Russian supplies.
Right.
And so that is going to help, I think, where we're going to have longer term drivers for electricity coming from the EV movement, but I would think that it's going to come from artificial intelligence. And the fact is that the AI boom and the AI romance that's going on with government and industry requires huge data centers. Are energy intensive operations. They have to run 24/7 uninterrupted power and cannot be reliant upon weather dependent power systems like wind or solar. And already Microsoft is looking at commissioning the 3 Mile Island nuclear reactor that has been shuttered since 1986 or so, just to have a reliable 24/7 clean power system to run their AI operations. And they're not alone. Others are looking at possible modular nuclear reactors, and I think this is I am hopeful that somebody will see the light that nuclear is a really good source of energy in its reliability, and it will provide power not just for the AI, but it's going to ease power crises that take place around the world. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Charlie, to your point, that's an interesting point. That's why I want to just touch on it briefly. So obviously, after the stigma of nuclear energy between Chernobyl and some of these accidents probably kind of put a pause on it. In your kind of analysis and study, do you have any perspective of what maybe, the Trump administration is going to do with the nuclear energy option? Do you think they're going to deregulate to increase that, to kind of facilitate the AI and maybe fill the void? Or do you have any perspective on how that may play out? Because nuclear is kind of flown under the radar, to be totally honest. No one's talked about it, so I'm interested to get your take.
Okay. I think it has been, but it's not gone away.
Okay.
And where we have seen the interest recently is because of the huge demand that are required for the data centers that run AI engine. And if anybody's traveled through Northern lately, it is an absolute amazement of big buildings that are data centers, and they all have banks and banks of diesel generators hooked up to them because they have to fire the generators up once a week just to make sure they're going to come on when they need them. So it's a hugely energy intensive operation, and you got to keep it cool. And by the way, various curtain walls and anodized structures, racks, for example, are being used in the data center business. And there, just through the construction of data centers, to have an anodized component that exists there as well. So, at any rate, yeah, I think nuclear is going to be in the fact that, number one, it's clean. The emissions of greenhouse gases don't take place like coal, other fossil fuel. Would hope that there's going to be a more rational approach to an energy portfolio where we can temper our desire for fossil fuel and the need for reliability with the development of renewables and continue with the wind, the solar, but do it at not such a frenetic pace that ignores other potential good sources of clean power.
So it's interesting that you mentioned nuclear as a source of clean power because it is a very clean source of power with respect to carbon emissions, but we've got the issue of nuclear waste, and we almost had a solution with the Yucca Mountain repository, but the political will to actually make that happen did cause it to not go through, and now all the nuclear waste is being held at the power plant facilities. So do you see a closely divided House being able to figure out a solution to that, or are we just going to build up more primary and secondary waste?
They've managed to sustain it for as long as they have because of an executive order that went through, I believe it was under President Carter, which forbade or banned the reprocessing of nuclear fuel. Because one of the byproducts of fuel reprocessing is plutonium, a fissile element that's used in weapons. Well, nuclear fuel, essentially, a fuel rod becomes poisoned through neutron absorbers as it is in use. And there's still plenty of good uranium-35 fissile uranium left in a fuel rod. It's just that as the poisonous elements, the neutron absorbers, build up in the fuel rod, it's no longer efficient. And instead of reprocessing it, as they do in France, UK, Japan, we throw them away, or shall I say, we at the power task expense for the perhaps the new Elon Musk efficiency team can take a look at that. Yeah, and we did have Yucca Mountain. I can't tell you how many billions of dollars were spent studying that city from all angles, except by Senator Harry Reid and his appointment of a guy named Jasko to be NRC chairman, his former science advisor to Harry Reid, and it was essentially a euthanasia of the notion of disposing fuel. If they reprocess fuel, and of course I'm not in control of any of this, but I'd have reprocessing to simply remove the poisons, reuse the fuel, because that is efficient, and then you have volumetrically a hell of a lot less waste to dispose of. And they know there's a safe place for it. But there's not only that, when you're thinking of the conventional nuclear reactors, there are several other styles that are being talked about, one of which is using the element thorium rather than uranium as a fissile material. That could be talked about at length because thorium is much more plentiful than uranium in the world, and there are places like Georgia, Virginia, and the beach sands of Florida that are replete with monazite minerals, which are a thorium-rich source. So, opportunities out there for utilizing the naturally occurring radioactive elements to generate power. Is there a legislative opposition? Or people don't like our radioactive, sort of the modern equivalent of witchcraft, if you will. Something you can't see, it causes harm, but radiation also cures cancer. So there is a happy medium somewhere along the line. So I believe that we will see a greater emphasis. This may not be across the board, and it may not be a Gallup, but certainly driven by people like Microsoft and other very power-hungry, powerful companies. They're going to want to keep the ball rolling and promote even modular small nuclear reactors, I believe, to power the data centers.
With regards to that, Charlie, do you think if, let's say, this kind of idea takes off, right, and because it's being pushed by big tech, it has more maybe energy behind it, no pun intended, than it had in the past. Do you think there would be any appetite to then leverage that nuclear energy for domestic use outside of AI, right, to offset additional costs associated with petroleum, solar, and wind? Or do you think this would be kind of a siloed exercise just specific to AI only?
That's a good question. I think it may well be stimulated by the AI faction.
Okay.
But what it is going to do is free up excess capacity, excess generating capacity that would otherwise be soaked up by the AI folks.
Yep.
Or it will serve as a stimulus to add to the portfolio of energy sources, which we should have a well-balanced portfolio with different sources so that when one goes down, something else is online.
Yep. Okay. That's interesting.
So, Charlie, can we move on to others, or do you have more to add for energy?
Well, we got talking about there, very important, but let's segue into the cabinet picks and what we might see from them coming out of the administration. Of course, where we have our immediate interest is in the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, where we have a former congressman from Mr. Lee Zeldin has been nominated to be the new EPA administrator. Mr. Zeldin has a very solid Republican voting record. He has voted against the moratorium on offshore drilling in the Florida Gulf. He voted against the moratorium on the Arctic oil and gas leases. And he has been outspoken in favor of deregulation. So we're not going to see a huge drive to increase regulation under Mr. Zeldin. Where we might recall when Trump 1 was in power, we had a rule, or he had a policy that when a federal agency made a new rule, promulgated a new rule, we had that agency was compelled to remove 2 rules from the books. So I suspect that may well come into play. Another big difference, which I expect to see, is after Trump 1, there was a ban on the sue and settle practice that has been employed by various environmental activist groups over the years. I can't recall exactly when it came into being, but it worked like this, that if the agency doesn't have a rule in place or has not acted to pass a rule that the activists want to see, the activist groups will sue the agency, but it's sort of a closed door, backroom deal where we sue you and you agree to settle the suit, and you do so by passing a rule. We get the court to give it this imprimatur of court authority, and so the agency is compelled to pass the rule. That's called sue and settle. The office the first time around, he banned that practice. EPA was no longer allowed to engage in sue and settle tactics with the enviro groups. That became banned again under Biden, where Biden reintroduced sue and settle. And that has been the practice since that time. And I expect Trump will follow through, or at least through his various agents. You'll see the sue and settle again taken out of circulation. Other things EPA can probably expect to be doing is, in terms of cost-benefit analysis, there has been a shift in deciding what is a major rulemaking, and I think that's going to be going by the wayside, and we may see greater scrutiny on the cost-benefit analysis in environmental rules. Next on the list is going to be Secretary of Energy. Now, this person's interesting. This is Chris Wright, who is the current CEO of Liberty Energy, and that has been described as a fracking company, but it is essentially a very large, maybe 20% of the United States natural gas supply comes from this company. So it's been reported. And Mr. Wright has been a critic of current energy policy and the so-called net zero by 2020, as well as opposed to the SEC climate risk disclosure provisions. So we again expect deregulatory emphasis coming from Mr. Wright at Department of Energy. And perhaps I have not seen anything related to his stance on nuclear, but I would not be surprised if he might embrace it. A very controversial figure comes up next, and where it might play out is in some of the litigation going on currently, and that is the nominee for Attorney General, Mr. Matt Gaetz. Mr. Gaetz is vehemently opposed by the Democrats in the Senate, and I expect that they're going to try through the House Ethics Investigation Report, which is currently pending against Mr. Gaetz, or an investigation report of Mr. Gaetz. That is something that the Democratic strategists would like very much to see released. There was no criminal indictment by the U.S. Justice Department for alleged misdeeds, but I think that there is a huge discussion going on as to what can be done to torpedo Mr. Gaetz. And he also has got some Republican critics, too, so he's not uniformly loved across both sides. We'll see what happens there. Where an attorney general pick has a lot to do with anodizing is going to be in the nature of what litigation gets paused, what litigation is the U.S. Department of Justice going to want to defend, and what is going to be actually what level of enforcement cases might be taken on at the federal level. Other departments may be less significant to anodizing, but of interest. We have Robert Kennedy Jr. being nominated to be the Health and Human Services Administrator. I suspect that might be an interesting and perhaps troublesome nomination, in that Mr. Kennedy has embraced the concept of MAHA, or Make America Healthy Again. And this would be going after big food and big pharma and promulgating regulations or even promoting legislation which targets ultra-processed food and other diet-related diseases like diabetes and obesity. So this puts a new interesting spin on the new Trump deregulatory efforts in other arenas where we might see new regulations being promoted by the Health and Human Services Department under a Kennedy. Okay, we already mentioned the Department of Government Efficiency, the DOGE. Again, Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy. We don't know what they're going to do, but I can see potential problems, and where this might actually play out is in the Supreme Court if there is a conflict between the chief executive and the legislative branch and questions of separation of powers. Let's see. Finally, where do we see Department of Labor coming in? I have not heard of any announcements for a new labor secretary, but I have heard floated the notion that Andrew Pudzer, former restaurant CEO of CKE Restaurants, is tossed around as a potential labor, and that would be interesting too, because it's someone who has worked hard with the factions, the employees that are line workers and are subject to wage and hour, minimum wage, as well as occupational safety standards. So that yet remains to be seen. That's all I have on the candidates and the confirmation. Trump, we know, has been auguring for recess appointments, which allow some of the nominees to be going into the cabinet position without the senatorial constitution. I'm not sure if that's going to happen.
Charlie, you set up the next discussion point quite well with the Department of Labor, because reporting to the Department of Labor is OSHA, and that's something that could have a huge impact on our members. If you would give us the 50,000-foot overview of this new proposed rule, heat injury and illness prevention in outdoor and indoor work settings, that would be lovely.
Okay. That was discussed in the regulatory newsletter, and this is a rule that has been proposed, but it has not yet gone to the register as a final rule. And this, I believe, is going to be one of the rulemaking that gets the pause button when Mr. Trump takes office. I think that it may well get paused. And if it doesn't get paused, for whatever reason, I think that this is an example where there will be challenges in court on the rule, and I don't envision a Trump Justice Department defending it. So it may be, and I think the chances are very good, that this rule will simply die on the vine.
Okay.
Come back and correct me in the future if I'm wrong.
Well,
I do believe that this is one of the rules that's going to just fade away. The other rule, which is already being challenged in court, is the OSHA walk-around rulemaking. And this is, again, a case where Justice Department is not going to want to defend the rule, because we have a strong pro-business view coming into the office. And from earlier discussion, the walk-around rule, it is viewed widely as an open door for organized labor to come into a facility and engage in recruiting and other activities that otherwise might be prohibited. So there's numerous legal challenges going on to that particular rule, and I think that it will, again, be a rule where the DOJ simply says, we're not going to stick up for that rule.
Charlie, do you know what's the impetus behind these two rules? What was driving this?
Well, the heat injury rule, it makes common sense. You don't want to have nobody wants to hurt an employee by exposing them to unnecessary and intolerable conditions, whether it's some physical agent like heat or radiation or noise or some chemical agent. You know, everybody who is an employer wants to operate a safe workplace, and anodizers are no different in that regard. Where the heat injury rulemaking received a lot of emphasis is from agriculture in states like California, and from the construction industry, where we have hot jobs taking place outdoors under conditions of heat stress. Locations which are probably a little more intersecting with anodizing would be in warehousing, materials handling, and other transfer, storing of materials where people are exposed to hot conditions that aren't necessarily air conditioned and heated environment. I would appreciate any information on concerns that the anodizing community has about locations and circumstances where heat injury might be encountered. But as far as I can tell from looking at the case in action, OSHA has used historically what they call the general duty clause, which is the duty under the Occupational Safety and Health Act that an employer has to maintain a safe working place. There is no specific standard for heat injury or illness. This is what OSHA had proposed in the heat injury and illness prevention rule. And that has what has been described as some arbitrary requirements, as well as difficult to measure indices that were criticized in comments on the rule as being impractical. The type of instrumentation that would measure the humidity, the direct and indirect light on a person, and otherwise, it had been suggested that why not go to something simple like the heat index? And I believe OSHA had agreed with commenters that, you can use the heat index, but the rule is going to say use this fancier instrumentation that we're recommending. So, at the end of the day, I think that there are cases of employees that have been injured by exposure to heat, drivers, warehousemen, certainly agricultural workers out in the field. There have been cases where negligent employers have failed to provide water, shade, shelter. OSHA had attempted to federalize, really, what has been done in certain states. Like California, Cal OSHA has its own heat injury prevention standard. Oregon does too. And there's a couple other states out there that I can't quite remember off the top of my head. But some states have taken the initiative ahead of OSHA in promulgating a standard for heat injury prevention and enforcing it under state law. So, will it become federalized? Juncture, I don't think so. I think it'll be one of the rules that fades away, along with the walk-around rule. I think walk around rule not going to go get pursued by a Trump DOJ. Defend that rule in court.
If you were a member of AAC, though, this is a risk to our business. What are some steps you'd recommend that at least we start putting some plans in place to address this?
Potentially enforceable, and you could have a very zealous compliance health officer from the OSHA come in and find fault, where a responsible employer, whether it's an anodizer or anybody else, market chain, you have to be cognizant of the environment that the employees are working in. And it is something that is natural to human beings to be able to say, is this a hot, nasty environment? Do we need to have some relief in the form of a cooling area, a break room, a container of cold water for the employees? That is fairly good common sense, I think. And as long as some basic steps are taken, maintain the comfort levels of employees given a difficult, potentially heated, hot environment, then it's hard to criticize. Whether or not that can be reduced to rulemaking and enforced, well, that is where the OSHA has been coming from, where they want to make it enforceable. But there's a lot of factors, just as many types of jobs there are. A person working on an anodizing tank is not doing the same job as a guy installing shingles on a roof on a hot day. Yeah. So these multiple factors need to be taken into consideration, and it's not a one-size-fits-all situation. So, do you see in the anodizing industry a opportunity for improvement, or is the anodizing industry cognizant of potential hazards coming from heat and being able to address those through their own company initiatives?
I think a lot of anodizers have been proactive in addressing the heat index. I know up here in Minnesota, when it gets warm, we're out handing out bottles of water and cold towels and things like this. So we're very cognitive of the heat and the impact it has on our people. I find it interesting, though, that we talked earlier in our conversation about electricity, and if it requires us to put more fans, and maybe it does, more fans and other energy absorbing devices to move air, then that's going to put an increased demand on the energy grid as well.
Absolutely, as it does for the data centers and keeping the servers cool. There is no single solution here, but what you hit on is the fact that you are cognizant of the environment, as all good employers should be, is understanding what kind of working environment the employee is working in and making sure that there is a reasonable amount of comfort. Not every job is comfortable all the time, and some work is in fact work. But the trick is to come to a decision as to at what point does that work become a hazard, or the working conditions become a hazard. And that's where OSHA has attempted to define a hazard through some instrumental measurements and some other means of acclimation and schedules of breaks and other steps towards relieving an employee of potential injury, risk of injury, coming from heat. Like I said, and looking at the situation, is there's so many different factors that go into different jobs that it's very difficult to generalize and say we're going to define a heat hazard and those steps which may be taken to minimize it. Some are not so obvious. How to mitigate it is probably going to depend very much on the company, the job,
I chuckle in that you reported the heat index of 80 degrees Fahrenheit. Well, heck, you can be down south, and in November you're going to have 80-degree weather, and you're not going to escape.
That's correct. That's correct, and people are acclimated to 80 degrees.
Correct.
In November. I mean, I lived in South Carolina, and it got warm. But you get used to it. That's
this walk around rule to say that we're going to open up doors and we're required to let you in. There's a lot of PPE and there's a lot of training that goes on because of the chemicals and the aluminum movement. There has to be some forethought into that as well, because that could create all sort of stoppages in work as we bring people through.
Yeah, it's a very awkward proposed rule defined who a representative, where an employee initially was interpreted to be a employee of the company that is working in the work environment and has been selected by the employers to be employees to be their representative. The definition of what an employee representative was or would be is open the door to any stranger, an untrained person, as long as the compliance officer believed their presence was reasonably necessary. Do compliance officers, are they biased in favor of one labor or another? I don't know, but certainly under the administration, we had the chief executive announce that he was the most pro-labor president in U.S. history. Everything has been very grounded as labor position coming from the administration. I don't expect that's going to continue. Trump administration.
Charlie, in closing, because our time is coming to an end, I always look forward to section number 8 of your technical of your report, intellectual property news, and I know George scours this, and so what are some of the key takeaways of what's new with IP with intellectual property news? You report new patents and all that. What tickled your fancy in that section there, Charlie?
Somebody actually reads that and really relish feedback on the news. A lot of times I'm just flying blind trying to figure out, okay, what is to the AAC and well, one of the things in the past, I am a member of the bar and where I segued in. But intellectual property is a keen interest of mine, and I'm always on the lookout, as far as the AAC goes, as our newly patented applications for technology with aluminum alloy. What I saw coming recently, and better, are a lot of non-chrome 6 or chromium 6 substitutes that are at least being patented as a new invention. reflects the drive to hexavalent chromium. Probably California's leading. Also, we have Europe and the ROHS forces that are leaning towards doing away with Chrome 6. Does alternate finishes work as well? I can't say because I haven't had the experience in it, but certainly in looking at some of the applications where the hard chrome anodizing has played out, it has been in precision aerospace applications where a certain finish quality is needed, and it is obtained by the use of the hard chrome anodizing. Are other substitutes going to play out as well? I think that's probably too early to tell, but we'll find out as they get put into practice. But other developments which catch my eye are new alloys or claims for new anodizing processes, where we've seen a lot of patents come out over the last couple of years is coming out of Apple, where the finishes on the various iPhones and other devices that Apple puts out are quite sophisticated applications of anodizing technology. And so they've done a marvelous job in keeping the patent engine humming for the iPhones, et cetera.
That's interesting.
So,
well, thank you, Charlie. This was always good to get, especially during a time like this when we have a transitional period between the administrations. Getting your perspective is extremely valuable. It makes all of us at least have a clearer picture of what to look for instead of speculating.
Oh yeah,
that could be a very dangerous game, worrying and speculating. So I think it was really interesting to get your take on a lot of this stuff, and it's gonna. I'm hoping moving into the next 4 years be, at least an uptick for the anodizing industry, hopefully.
Right.
I think so, and I hope I'm not wrong in trying to at least prognosticate for the benefit of the anodizing community as to what might be coming down the pike.
Right.
But in my closing remarks, all I want to say is thank you very much for the opportunity to be your investigator in this regard. And I look and solicit any kind of feedback that I can get, which helps me focus on issues that the anodizers think are important to them, because that allows me to drill down a little bit more and maybe come up with some good information.
Yes, perfect. PFAS, we didn't chat about it. We will next time. Keep reporting on it.
Okay,
Yes.
Very good. Still a hot issue. It's not going to go away, even under Trump.
It's a forever chemical. Ugh. So, thank you, Charlie. George, final thoughts?
Thanks, Charlie.
Thank you very much.
We're short on time, and we'll have to talk to you again.
All right.
Thanks. See ya.